For this video, we wanted to highlight some of the best examples of fighters who completely failed to deliver on the hype, whether due to the pressure of competing at the highest levels or simply because they were never as good as their billing to begin with. So, let's get into it. Gilbert Melendez. It may seem like a lifetime ago now, but there was a point in time when the former Strikeforce lightweight champion Gilbert Melendez had a very credible case at being the best 155-pound fighter on the planet. With a record of 21-2 prior to him joining the UFC, El Nino had been able to assert his dominance over his stacked division with a number of trademark wins, besting Jorge Masvidal, Josh Thompson, and Shinya Aoki during a reign that lasted for the best part of 3 years. And when he eventually left the dissolving Strikeforce for the UFC, he was given an immediate crack at their promotional champion Benson Henderson. As you would expect, there was some serious hype behind this powerful contender. And though he narrowly lost out against the champ by way of split decision, he clearly did enough to establish himself as an elite fixture within the division. His next outing, a blood and guts brawl with Diego Sanchez, only served to fuel his status as a potential great. However, despite coming away from that bout in victory, it would be the final win of his career. From there, Melendez's stock would take hit after hit as he slumped to an 0-5 streak before putting the future of his career in doubt with an ongoing 2-year hiatus. A great fighter in his day, of that there is little doubt. But unfortunately, when the time came to step up to the big show, to say that Melendez fell short would be a massive understatement. Will Brooks. Next up, we go to one of the more dramatic falls we've seen in recent years. The name Will Brooks might not mean much to most of you, but for a time, fans of this sport thought that this former Bellator champion was set to be a major hit after signing to the UFC in 2016. His 17-1 record contained within it victories over the likes of Drew Dober, Marcin Held, and a pair of wins over Michael Chandler, leading many to believe that Brooks was going to be a major success story in the top flight. Brooks seemed to have the perfect skill set to translate his winning ways into the UFC octagon, and after debuting with an impressive showing against the veteran Ross Pearson, it was clear that ill will was set for greatness. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the disastrous shortly after. Upon taking a step up in competition to face off against Alex Oliveira, a third-round defeat would stand as the beginning of a 3-fight skid, as Brooks succumbed to finishes at the hands of Cowboy Oliveira, Nick Lentz, and Charles Oliveira before receiving his marching orders from Dana White in 2018. Though his potential was clear as day, Brooks simply couldn't produce the goods when it mattered most, making him a shoo-in for this list. Hector Lombard. Picture the scene. The UFC have just signed a major prospect from one of their biggest competitors, a fighter with a 31-2-1 record and an outstanding finishing rate. One look at this new acquisition's ridiculous physique is to confirm to you that Dana and company have brought in an absolute gem. The problem? The fighter's name is Hector Lombard. Okay, we're being a little harsh here, but based on his billing and his extensive credentials, Lombard looked to be a serious force within the 185-pound division. Physically gifted and a fan favorite during his stint as Bellator champion, his status as a staple within the middleweight upper echelons seemed to be a given. Unfortunately, after a truly lackluster promotional debut that ended in defeat to Tim Boesch, despite a half-decent performance once in a while, this Cuban prospect would only take home 3 victories from 12 UFC outings. Eventually, he would retire from the sport on the back of a 6-fight loss streak that showed him grow less and less fearsome with each passing fight. As a decorated judoka and former Olympian, no one can say that Lombard's career as a whole was a failure, but one look at his post-Bellator run will tell you that he was never as good as he was cracked up to be. Mirko Cro Cop. Okay, before we go any further, do not mistake our inclusion of the legendary Mirko Cro Cop on this list as a criticism of his best years. We, of course, understand just how good this Croatian heavyweight was in his heyday. But to say that Mirko Cro Cop's time in the UFC was tough would be putting it lightly. After his incredible run within the Pride organization, the time for one of the sport's biggest stars to test himself against the remainder of the world's elite finally came in 2007, as Cro Cop made his long-awaited debut against Eddie Sanchez at UFC 67. And sure enough, Mirko made quick work of his outmatched opponent, putting him away with a TKO finish inside the first round. All of a sudden, it seemed as though the UFC had another massive heavyweight star on their hands. A proven veteran who could inject even more electricity into the most watched division in the sport. However, once Cro Cop made a quick turnaround to take on Gabriel Gonzaga, the UFC's plans turned disastrous, as the Brazilian underdog managed to score a first-round head kick knockout over the sport's most infamous head kick. You truly couldn't write a more disastrous finish to a fight, and in truth, Mirko never truly looked the same from that point onwards. After racking up a 4-7 record that ended with a trio of knockout losses, Cro Cop's time in the UFC came to a halt, leaving many of us wishing that things could have turned out better for this revered superstar. Ben Askren. Love him or hate him, there's just no way to look at Ben Askren's UFC run as anything less than a major bust. After the UFC parted ways with one of its all-time great fighters, Demetrius Johnson, in a trade with Askren's home One Championship, the stage was set for one of MMA's all-time biggest what-ifs to be answered. For Askren had already established himself as one of the best welterweights of all time, a pure wrestling phenom whose linear approach had proven to be too much for every single one of his opponents, up until his retirement in 2017. However, when the UFC came a-knockin', Ben returned to mixed martial arts for a trio of fights under the UFC banner. A run that contained within it a controversial debut victory over Robbie Lawler, an underwhelming submission loss to Demian Maia, and, of course, a 5-second flying knee KO defeat to Jorge Masvidal that made Askren the laughing stock of the MMA world. Whether it was deserved or not, the combination of Askren's poor UFC form and his extremely outspoken personality made him an instant target for trolls and critics alike. And the less we say about his ill-advised dip into the boxing ring, the better. A great fighter in his day, but unfortunately a major bust for the UFC, all things considered. Uriah Hall. Once seen as the natural successor to the middleweight legend Anderson Silva, Uriah Hall entered the UFC on the back of an impressive stint on The Ultimate Fighter that saw him capture the imagination of the world through his dynamism and overall striking prowess. And the comparisons with the Spider weren't completely off point. He had a certain artistry to his style, a creatively tinged approach that was truly captivating to watch. However, as his UFC run began to hit some roadblocks, it became apparent to us all that Uriah's habit of freezing up in big moments was a serious problem. And though he was nothing short of stunning when he was on, Hall would find himself gun-shy in the most pivotal of moments, failing to turn up when it mattered most. And while he would string together a win or two, convincing many that he had finally gotten his head screwed on straight, time and time again this talented striker fell flat. For a man whose nickname is Primetime, Hall's inability to perform under the bright lights was a constant over the last decade or so. CM Punk. And finally, we come to the single biggest bust in UFC history. How could we not give a mention to the WWE superstar turned MMA failure, Phil CM Punk Brooks? While there are fighters on this list who had much higher levels of hype around them, fighters who many people had pegged as future divisional greats, there was nothing quite like watching this completely untalented UFC wannabe get a spot on the UFC 203 main card, joining legends such as Alistair Overeem and Stipe Miocic on the pay-per-view broadcast. The problem was not so much that he was a major draw for the company. It was more so that he had absolutely nothing else to offer the UFC. As a fighter, to say he was unathletic would be softening the blow. Facing off against BJJ brown belt Mickey Gall, Punk was immediately on the defensive, after succumbing to a takedown in the fight's opening exchange. From there, the pro wrestler was helpless as Gall began to go to work, eventually finishing the fight mercifully by way of submission. And if that wasn't bad enough, the UFC actually tried to give him another shot, setting him up to take on his fellow MMA newcomer Mike Jackson. However, despite lowering the quality of his opposition, the CM Punk experiment once again failed, with Brooks turning in a performance that was completely bereft of quality, inspiration, or anything that would define the type of fighter who deserves to compete in the UFC. A complete and total dud.